Alright, class, welcome back. Been having a few technical difficulties, so if this video is a little bit late, I apologize. But it's all the same. Chapters 5 and 6 is what we're moving on to now. We just went through chapters 3 and 4, so there's a lot that we have learned about setting River Bottom versus Robin Hill and what is kind of happening with the characters and how that leads to themes. That's kind of the trend that we're going to take for each of these grouped chapters that we'll go through. We'll look at the settings, look at how the society they're in and where they are located is affecting the characters and how that brings out themes. Obviously, a lot of these things are journeyed through the plot itself of the novel of My Father, Son Johnson, but please read the book. Don't just use these summaries and these classes alone. Read the book. Now, how I'm going to start the class as usual, I'm going to read over the summaries, go through some quotes, and then discuss. All right? Just turn it off my phone. Chapter 5, which is called To Market, To Market. And chapter 6, which is called A Wedding So Contrary. Alright? Chapter 5. Rami and the Hilchers go to the busy market to sell. Rami watches a gentleman try to sell a mangy horse unsuccessfully and decides to try to sell his goats in the same fashion by auctioning them. He drew a crowd and sold his goats, but comments were made about the fact that Son Johnson's son, Rami, was selling goats in the market. Son is pleased that they were successful at the market, and Rami volunteers to buy his father a drink with some of the money that he got from selling the goats. Son agrees, and Donnery and Rami sit by their stall talking. He expresses that he has a new type of freedom with his father, one where he's not cloistered by his mother's social standards. He explains the glaring differences in the personalities of his parents, as well as why their divorce was an accident. Then his mother, siblings, Jake, and the chauffeur come along. Debbie is both appalled and angry to see her child selling in the market. The scene drew a crowd because Debbie was so upset that she threatened to take Son to court. Son arrives and Debbie and the children reject his hand of friendship. That's chapter 5, To Market, To Market. Chapter 6. Rami and Son made a lot of money from their day at the market. However, it was clouded by the encounter with Debbie. Son does not go home, but went to town to drink, while Rami considers his mother's involvement with Jake and his father's seeming involvement with Mrs. Hilchon. When Son gets back, he and Rami have a discussion about Debbie's character, as well as whether or not he should live with her. Rami refuses. About a month later, they hear that Debbie and Jake are to be married. Rami does not attend the wedding, but watches from a big tamarind tree that was located near the church. A detailed description of the wedding occurs at this point. Rami went home after the proceedings to find an unexpectedly optimistic Son. Now, it's taking a sip. Would you like my Batman mug? Now, I really like these chapters because I do believe it's a turning point. It's the middle of the novel, so there's a lot that is happening, there's a lot that is moving, and you expect that the plot itself is going to push forward. The conflict is going to expand. Conflict is simply just what is happening between Jake, Son, Ma, and that whole family. Now, as we see in chapter 5, that is called To Market, To Market. I like the title, I like the movement of the title, To Market, To Market. It isn't saying just market, it isn't something simple. What it's trying to do is to represent something. Just like how chapter 4 is called Growing, but they're not just talking about growing plants, they're talking about the growing of the people, Son himself and how he's growing. We have discussed that in previous videos. Now, To Market, it's what I call an action title because it's not just talking about the market, it's talking about going there, and it's talking about the fact that Rami has to now go to the market to sell. This is now how he has to earn. All right, and it becomes a mission. The first quote, as C. Everett Palmer has started almost all of his chapters, right? The first paragraph is very descriptive. Now it goes like this. Sight of the marketplace gave me a heady feeling. There were so many people, some moving, some sitting, others squatting, laughing, talking, or haggling. None was quiet. Voices everywhere, and in every conceivable shriek and bellow. A large building was standing in the center, and from it, people spilled into the courtyard. Carts were drawn up in one place, in another, a few trucks, while donkeys and mules were hitched along fences and under trees. The jack donkeys' brain challenges for fights which they could not have. The air scented with stalls of fresh bread warm out of the ovens. Now, what I love about his descriptions is that he transports you there. Now, obviously, we're hearing all of the descriptions, the smells, what we can see, what we can hear, but most importantly, he tells us what he feels. This sort of madness and this sort of clustered feeling that the market gives you is a lot of mental pressure. So, what is happening now is that he feels, as he said, very heady, which is another way of him saying that he feels kind of dizzy. Now, this dizzying feeling is obviously bothering him a little bit. And what we find happening now is that it is affecting him a little. It can make you emotional, but it also makes him a little confused. But what he does do is step back and just kind of analyze his surroundings and then take it from there. Now, here's another description. Oh, and also we have to keep in mind that the type of active feeling that we see that is happening at the market shows us that a lot of things might happen here. So the way that it sets it up with all of the action, it kind of prepares us for what might be a dramatic chapter. Another quote for the setting. A mangy horse that seems to have had every joint in its bones dislodged. His ribs showed, all of them. He seemed to have been broken and put back together again. The owner was no less mangy than the horse and was cursed with a toothless mouth, ragtag beard, and pig little eyes, which scanned the crowd. Do I get six then? Do I air six? This has good blood, family or race horses. Who's paying five for him? Nobody seemed interested, and why should they be? He was coming down with his price instead of going up. My goats were having attention from the very start. Men were looking at them, walking around them. One man who was accompanied by a small boy seemed most interested. He probably was planning to start a herd with them for his little boy. Now, I really like how he describes the transactions at the market because it shows that this is what he has to do now. This is his life. This is how he has to help his father to grow because he has to also earn money with the father. That is what actually leads up to that problem. People may have been impressed with what he was doing. People may have been impressed with his goats. But the fact is that Son had a certain level of respect that he shouldn't be in the market selling. So people started looking at it weird. And now Ma, with Jake as her boyfriend and the amount of money that he's making, she sees him and she gets very upset about this. And this is where we're kind of starting to notice Ma changing her opinions on class, changing how she kind of does things. And this brings more conflict into the story. Even so that when Son eventually shows up, Brad and Arlene, his own kids, don't want to talk to him. But that is more into characters. I don't want to delve too much into that. That is for the next class. What we're looking at here is the setting. And the setting that we have is the market. Now, at River Bottom Store, we notice a lot of people respected Sonson's change. But now at the market, it's almost as if they're judging Rami because of Sonson's actions, which we've seen before when he showed up on Marble, when people ask why he stayed with Dad, and the society that he's in, the social situation he's in, affects him, affects how he feels, affects what he does. Just like in Miguel Street, and we notice that, well, no, that's second form. Just like in A Pound of Flesh, where Bassanio wanted to show that he had a certain status. He spent money. He wanted to court Portia. And we realized that he cared a lot about what people thought, which is also the same thing with Shylock. Shylock cared a lot about what people thought. And here, Rami may not care what people thought, but we can see how the way that people talk about him can affect him. And that is where the setting itself becomes a factor. All right? Next quotation. Jumping all the way to chapter 6, which is called A Wedding So Contrary. I love this title because it is a contrast, you know. A wedding is supposed to be a happy thing. Just to say a wedding so contrary shows that there's a bit of opposites that's happening. Right? Now, what we have here now, as it starts in chapter 6, a beautiful day and a disastrous one. We didn't have lunch together as father had promised. We didn't have lunch at all. Of course, we made a mint of money and bought candies in duplicates and cakes and small ones in mountains and fresh, fragrant loaves of bread. And Mrs. Hilcher had her pan full of fish and beef and escallion and thyme, such a pleasing array of booty. Booty means treasure, burn off. And yet our mouths were bitter. So he's making that contrast obvious, where here is a list of things that are sweet and food that is savory, but he said the mouth is bitter. And why it feels that way is that because what had happened at the market left what they would say a bad taste in your mouth. And that has put him in some bad moods. And that's also very interesting because the start of chapter 5, he said he felt heady. And that leads into all of the drama, which has now put him in a place where he feels very uncomfortable. Now, when they eventually realize that Ma is getting married, we notice that Rami is obviously affected by this, and he's worried about how it's going to affect Sun because finally Sun is doing well again, and this might bring him right back down to square one because of how emotional the situation might be. Listen to this quotation. I heard the organ peal, I heard the chord, the tune, the inferno to me at the time. Inferno meaning fiery. So hearing the chord made him very angry and heated when it's really a chord that is supposed to be something happy. And that chord is Here Comes the Bride. I didn't strain my mind about the proceedings that were going on in there. I thought only of father, how he was taking all of this. It must be hard on him. I thought, had to be hard on him. This is the unkindest cut of them all. First Jake had won his land and his home, the prized Robin Hill, and now his wife. Well, ex-wife, so what? They'd both live up there now. That would be bitter. Jake must have figured out for a long time back. So, what he's looking at is the fact that it's not just the taking of Ma, but it's what it represents. Jake took his land, and this is why setting becomes important, because Robin Hill becomes an emotional connection and not just a piece of land where they live. And Jake took that, and now he's living there with Ma. And that is how the emotional factor comes in. But what we realize by the end of that chapter is that, to our surprise, Sun is very upbeat. And that is why the next class that we'll talk about, we're really going to delve into characters, because we want to look at how this event has made Sun stronger. And we want to look at how the setting influences the characters, which influences the themes, right? And Sun now is going to step up stronger after this very miserable event for him. And what can even be seen as offensive. But a few questions that I will pose out there. How does this situation make you feel? How would this play out if you were in that situation? Would it affect you? Would you become stronger? Think about that going into the next class, which is on characters. And think about that going forward in the chapters. If you haven't read the chapters, please read them. If you haven't done the quiz, please do the quiz. Big up yourself. Stay safe.